In this video, we will talk about the SAML protocol, what it does for us, and how AuthPoint uses SAML to add multi-factor authentication to your logons. We will cover what's required for any SAML integration, how we configure SAML resources in AuthPoint, and how to troubleshoot SAML when it's not working. Let's get started. When you need to use multiple websites to do your job, having to log into each one of them as you go about your day can be annoying. SAML provides single sign-on over the internet so that you only need to log in once, and then that logon is passed along when you go to your other websites that support SAML so that you don't need to log in again. SAML allows these websites to send information behind the scenes using HTTPS headers, and many websites and services, including AuthPoint, support using SAML. The SAML protocol enables these different websites to trust your authentication by tying everything into a central source. This means you can use AuthPoint to centralize the authentication for all those websites and protect them with MFA. This makes those logons much more secure and more convenient for the users, which doesn't happen very often. When we talk about SAML, there are two terms that we need to understand: service providers and identity providers. Service providers are the services or websites that users are trying to log in and use. Examples of service providers include Salesforce, Office 365, AWS, and Dropbox, but there are many more. Any web service can potentially be a service provider. After we set up SAML, when a user logs into a service provider, that authentication is saved using cookies. When the user goes to another service provider, they don't have to log in again. Identity providers, such as AuthPoint, authenticate users when they log in to a service or application. They communicate with the service providers to let them know if a user is authorized to log in. The identity provider can also provide additional services as well. AuthPoint is a SAML identity provider, and it enables us to associate tokens with our users and protect all of the SAML logons with MFA. AuthPoint also hosts an identity provider portal, or IDP portal, which is where users can access all of their SAML service providers in one place. On this diagram, we can see the SAML authentication flow. There are two ways that SAML authentication can happen, and it depends on where the user logs in initially. In the top example, the user starts at the AuthPoint IDP portal, where they log in and see their SAML service providers. They select one and are taken to it and automatically logged in. In the bottom example, the user doesn't use the IDP portal at all. Instead, they just go straight to the website they want to use and try to log in. The site is protected with AuthPoint MFA, so the user is sent to AuthPoint to provide their credentials. After the user authenticates, they are sent back to the service they wanted to use. In either example, after the user has logged in once, they can go to any other service provider, either directly or using the IDP portal, and they won't have to log in again. The way this works is through exchanging metadata about the user behind the scenes. When we configure SAML, we are just telling the service and identity providers how to send this metadata to each other. Let's take a look at what is involved with adding SAML resources to AuthPoint. Here we are on the WatchGuard Cloud dashboard. I'll start by going to Configure at the top, then AuthPoint. Next, I'll select Resources on the left. We can see I already have an IDP portal configured on my account, which we'll use later. On the bottom of the Resources page, we'll find the Certificates button, which we can click to look at our AuthPoint certificates. If you do not already have a certificate in your account, go ahead and create a new one. You should only need one certificate for all of your AuthPoint resources. If I view the options for my certificate on the right, I can find the SAML metadata. We can either download the metadata as a file or copy a link to it. Which one we use will depend on the service provider that we are integrating with. The service provider that I'm going to demonstrate needs a metadata URL, so I'll copy that here. We could integrate AuthPoint with any number of different services using SAML. In this example, the service provider that we will configure MFA for is the Firebox Access Portal. These are the SAML settings for the Access Portal on a Firebox. For information about configuring the rest of the Access Portal, refer to our Help Center documentation. We just need to configure a few things to get the Access Portal ready. I'll type the name of my identity provider, AuthPoint. Then I'll type a public domain name for the Access Portal that resolves to this Firebox. This domain name is where AuthPoint will send users after authentication. Finally, we just need to paste in the IDP metadata URL that we copied from our AuthPoint certificate earlier. After I've filled out those fields, I can save the changes to the Access Portal. Now the Access Portal knows how to send users over to AuthPoint, but I'm not done with it yet. The next thing I need to do is get the SAML metadata from the Access Portal so I can add it to my AuthPoint account. On the SAML configuration page, it tells us that we can get this information by visiting the following URL. If we go there, we can see the service provider information for the Access Portal. I'll use these fields to configure my AuthPoint SAML resource. If we jump back to our AuthPoint resources, I'll select a new SAML resource from the drop-down at the top, then click Add. In here, we'll want to name our resource and then select the type of service provider in the list. This selection can make or break the integration, so make sure you select the right one. If the service provider you would like to integrate with is not listed, you can select Other and attempt to configure it, but it is not guaranteed to work if the service provider needs any special information. Let WatchGuard support know if there is a SAML integration we need to add. Above the integration type drop-down is an integration guide link. I'll select a service here, and we can click the link to be taken directly to the guide for the service provider that we have selected. These guides are a great resource to tell you exactly how to configure SAML for that service. Back in my SAML resource, I'll select Firebox Access Portal. I've gone and matched up the fields that were on the Access Portal's SAML page and copied the values over to my AuthPoint SAML resource. I've also uploaded the certificate from the Access Portal and enabled encryption. I can go ahead and save my resource now. When we create resources, we also need to define how users will authenticate to those resources based on their groups. I have clicked Authentication Policies on the left, which is where we configure these settings. In this account, I only have a single group for my users, and I already have a policy in place that enforces multi-factor authentication for the group. This policy is applied to all resources on the account, so my new resource is already included and my users are authorized to use it. You can use authentication policies and policy objects to configure the level of access that you need for all of the different users in your environment. For more information about authentication policies and how to configure them, refer to the Using AuthPoint Authentication Policies video. Now that both AuthPoint and the Firebox Access Portal have been configured with each other's SAML metadata, we can log into the Access Portal using SAML. Here we are on the Access Portal logon page, and we can see the AuthPoint button, which we can select to begin a SAML logon. After clicking this, we are taken over to AuthPoint to proceed with the authentication. I'll enter my username, then my user's password, and I'll provide a one-time password for the second factor. After I'm authenticated, AuthPoint sends me back to the Access portal, and I'm able to see the Access portal applications I can use. Now that I've logged into one place with SAML, AuthPoint will remember my user. On this tab, I'll navigate over to the IDP portal, and I am automatically logged in. I see my Access portal in the list and can click on it to be taken directly to the Access portal without authenticating. Since SAML authentication happens over the internet, there are not always a lot of log messages when something goes wrong. If you get cryptic errors when you are trying to use SAML for the first time, check your settings. Usually if it isn't working, it is because of a configuration error in either the service or identity provider. Once the integration is working, when users fail to log in, they will receive an error message on the logon screen. This includes a reason and a request ID, which can be used to track this request through AuthPoint. In the WatchGuard Cloud audit logs, we will see a record of any SAML authentication AuthPoint has processed. We can click on these logs for more information, and if the user failed to log in, we will see a reason why. That should do it for SAML. In this video we covered the basics of the SAML protocol and the differences between service and identity providers. We talked about how AuthPoint can integrate with any SAML service provider, including a WatchGuard Access portal, and we covered how to troubleshoot SAML.